Dr. Sasha Duffy. Um, a therapy will work better if it goes straight to the brain than any other because of the brain barrier, blood barrier.
Yes. So simply put, the answer is yes. So scientists for many decades have been trying to cross the blood-brain barrier in terms of therapeutics for the central nervous system. So any disease that affects the brain, we have to get the therapies to the brain. And we have tried for a long time to have them injected via the venous system. So the things that we usually think about when we get our normal injections, but it just doesn't go where we want it to go, and it doesn't do what we want to do if it can't get there. And so, what we've learned to appreciate is we have to go to the source, and the source is the brain, and that is where the disease affects our loved ones. And therefore, we have to find mechanisms to get there. And it's a very closed off, safe, protected space for many reasons. And so it's not just simply getting across the brain barrier, but it's getting across the blood-brain barrier safely, and in a way that we can get there in a targeted fashion. So even if we can get across the blood-brain barrier, the brain itself is very complex with multiple layers in terms of the surface and deeper structures. So not only do we have to get into that space, but we have to get to the target in which we're hoping to get to, which is kind of deeper into the part of the brain, which is why companies have looked at doing things like intrathecal injections, those spinal taps to get it across a blood-brain barrier. And then looked at studies as once we get it across there, are we getting it to our target? And then studies like Unicure using brain surgery really to get down to those deeper structures to deliver the therapies that they're hoping to be beneficial and potentially very therapeutic in our individuals. So it's a huge challenge when we're dealing with brain diseases and in therapies. And we have come an incredibly long way in terms of the intricate science and what they're able to do in creating these really cool small molecules that can act almost as delivery mechanisms and getting to those parts of the brain. So we've overcome a lot of those challenges, but we also need to make sure not only does it get to where we want it to get, but not to where we don't want it to get. So we talk about on target effects and off target effects, meaning getting to do what it wants us to do without doing any naughty stuff downstream. So it's a very intricate science, and that's why it takes time. It takes time not only in the lab and working in petri dishes and making sure we can create these molecules to do what they want to do, and then translating that into to models like mice. And then it's a huge leap going from little mice brains and getting across their blood-brain barrier to humans and potentially other species in between. And that is why we talk about science taking so much time because it truly does. But we've made leaps and bounds. So we're getting across the blame barrier and we're getting to our targets and we're doing that effectively and efficiently. Now we just need to carry out what we ultimately want it to carry out, which is to slow down the disease or potentially be curative. So great question.
Thank you.
Um, Peg, can you have children after you have gene therapy?
So I'll clarify that question. I assume, sure, yes, you can have children, but I suspect the question is, if after you have gene therapy, can you pass on the gene? I believe that's what the question is. And the answer is, even after you have gene therapy, you are still at risk of passing the gene on. And the reason for that is because, kind of back to what Dr. Duffy was talking about, that most of the gene therapies are targeting the brain because Huntington's is a brain disease. And so even if it's going in and repairing the DNA in the brain, or it's changing the protein or the RNA, all of that is happening in the brain and even potentially in the other body cells. But I'm going to say two words, somatic and germline. So somatic means all the cells in your body. Germline, that's a weird word. That means if you're a woman, eggs, and if you're a man, sperm. Those are cells that aren't affected by gene therapy. And so even if you had gene therapy that fixed the genes in your brain, so to speak, in your ovaries, in your eggs, if you're a woman, your Huntington's repeat is still going to be long. Remember, you have two copies, one from your mom and your dad. If you have Huntington's disease, one of them is long, one of them is not long, and you still have the risk of passing that on. So even after you have gene therapy to fix or modify the gene or the gene products in your brain, that doesn't fix the problem with passing on the gene.
Thank you. Our next question is for Lisa. Once you are diagnosed, you can immediately get Social Security.
I feel like all of my questions, the very first answer I'm going to give is it depends. So we should make it like a little exercise game. You have to do like 5 squats or something every time I say that, but it depends. Because of course it depends on when you're diagnosed. Some people do predictive testing. So they are testing to see if they're going to get it in the future, which means they don't currently have symptoms. You do have to have active Huntington's symptoms in order to qualify for Social Security disability, or any disability really, or other, or a different disability going on. But for Huntington's disease, you do have to have active documented symptoms of Huntington's disease from a doctor, preferably a neurologist and someone who understands Huntington's disease, because they can write the document such that, it provides the details that Social Security needs to show how your symptoms of Huntington's disease are preventing you from being able to work. But good question.
Lisa, real quick, and a follow-up question to that. If you've tested anonymous and you have all these doctor visits that are under anonymous pseudonym, is that a problem when it comes to Social Security?
It could be. So if you are symptomatic, I would not recommend you getting care anonymously. So definitely start getting your care under your legal name and under your insurance, assuming you have it. Because you can't send something to Social Security that says, Joe Schmo has Huntington's disease if that's not your legal name and it's not the name attached to your Social Security number. So it usually isn't an issue if you test anonymously, but then if you do test gene positive, once you convert and once you're ready, you should definitely start going to a center of excellence under your name and your insurance, so that they can start documenting what's going on with you and so that you have that historical documentation.